Uh-oh, you idiot. You just got Autistic Girl Autumned. Now post this on subreddits, Discord servers, and image boards that have nothing to do with autistic people, because only smart people browse there. Originally, I was gonna make a video that was a lot more rich in evidence and science, but it was a project, I think, that was distracting me from actually making videos. Like, that in itself was a video. But right now, I want to focus on actually making that conlang I promised. And the production of the conlang itself has actually changed a lot, but nonetheless, I am going to show it. I will justify my evidence in a future video, but for now, I think what I'm about to say is pretty good to assume anyway. Now, first of all, I want people to understand the sort of shape of autism awareness. First of all, it doesn't have the sources. It doesn't, or at least often, you'll see articles by Autism Awareness that don't actually have sources. Like, even Know Your Meme has sources, so I expect it when they say something like, oh, 20 million studies say that ABA is good. And even when they do have those studies, they usually construe it in a very specific way. But ignoring the fact that they are anti-scientific, they also sometimes bastardize logic itself. Like, you would have to absolutely ruin the definition of language itself just to justify ABA. If you see actual videos of ABA, you would see that they take out the pragmatics, the grammar, and semantics of language, and there's no initiative because they, instead of the child actually doing things, they just force the kid to do whatever they say. And this is very dumb to do because, well, I'm at a loss for words because this is so simple. Like, I already implied it, didn't I? But anyway, because people are so illogical, I realize that, hey, this is just people that are genuinely trying to help children, or at least some of them. Like, obviously the BCPAs know what's going on, and I assume that a lot of people are in an Orwellian state of cognitive dissonance, because to say that ABA helps people is equivalent to saying 2 plus 2 equals 5. Like, a 7-year-old, if he's not pressured into thinking anything else, will say that ABA is bad because there's not as much language. It's easy to laugh at the ABA people and the anti-vaxxer people, but it makes you think, what if you yourself are wrong on a basic level? What if the capitalists, say, have corrupted your sense of logic, or even autism awareness, because autistic people have inevitably internalized a lot of autism awareness? What if your own logic is wrong? This is not to go full-on cogito ergo sum, but it's to establish that you have to assume a lot of things. But then again, you do have to assume a lot of things anyway, like, is there a God, yes or no? There's no scientific or logical way to answer that, so it's just assumed. Because living under autism awareness is akin to living in the Matrix, you kinda have to use wisdom more than knowledge. For example, I have hypothesized that autism awareness, the ideology, has knowledge that autistic people are actually more social, at least under an autistic society. But they're hiding this because they hate autistic people for being social. Now, I have been finding evidence for this, and so far, I think it's pretty good. I think it's safe to assume, but I realized that it was safe to assume initially because I already knew that autism awareness is uncultural. Like, it can insert itself into any culture, and has. Sure, everyone thinks that autistic people are disabled, or at least almost everyone, and almost everyone will disregard the social context, and almost nobody will consider autistic people in a state of nature. Like, we. This has been done for years, but for some reason it hasn't been applied to autistic people very often. Like, nobody's asking, what if autistic people existed in an autistic society? And that's what autism awareness depends on, but who's actively pushing for that? Autism, the concept, is so abstract that it doesn't actually relate to autistic people. Yes, it can at least vaguely refer to neurodevelopment, but it can also be stomach problems. So, while autism awareness is openly and explicitly defined by spiting autistic people, it's actually secondary. You see, it's not that they dislike autistic people, or at least that's not the heart of the issue. The problem is behaviorism. Basically, all of autism awareness can be boiled down to a religion of behaviorism. I say religion, but I say religion in terms of psychological needs. It has the same psychological place, people just assume that autism awareness is correct. And, the ABA thing kind of acts like a Sunday school, albeit a Sunday school run by mentally ill people. But it's paradoxically anti-religious because, in terms of beliefs, it ignores the existence of a world that you can't immediately observe. Like, that's kind of what behaviorism is. Like, people will distinguish behaviorism and quote-unquote radical behaviorism, but all behaviorism is radical, to be honest. It's honestly just a different flavor because they refuse to look at the actual thoughts and cognitions of autistic people. However, behaviorism and, by extension, autism awareness is inherently anti-autistic because their way of thinking is the opposite of how autistic people think. Like, if autistic people were left to their own devices, we would make the opposite of Walden 2. And we would make something that resembled socialism a little too much to underestimate. Essentially, autistic people are more likely to consider the monad, whereas autism awareness and behavioralists are more likely to consider the demiurgic aspect of reality. Also, in the state of nature, autistic people will think more so in terms of cause and effect, whereas behaviorists will only think, or get people to only think in terms of immediate cause and effect. After all, if you consider the implications ABA has on adulthood, then things only get uglier. As a matter of fact, I would go as far as to assert this. If you drink beer and then you have a hangover, you will have had that hangover at the same time you taste the beer, because they're both directly caused by drinking beer. The autistic individual needs to drink like it's Oktoberfest in Mecca, because the autistic mind has not been adapted to deal with such recklessness. Oh, and by the way, when I say autistic people, I don't necessarily include nonverbals. I don't want to say they're not autistic, but they wouldn't be if they don't have the benefits of autistic communication. But things are very uncertain regarding them because we don't actually know what their prefrontal cortex looks like, and it's hard to know how they use language. Nonetheless, it's unreasonable to put verbal people and nonverbal people in the same box of autism, especially when you already have childhood disintegrative disorder, pervasive developmental disorder, and the unfortunately named Asperger's syndrome. I'm not saying that they're all good definitions themselves. And I'm not saying we should bring back Asperger's, especially because it's named after the Nazi that participated in Action T4. I'm just saying that even with the best intentions, they end up being the opposite of what autistic people want. So if they're the opposite of autistic people, then autistic people should be the opposite back. Because, well, that's not necessarily an autistic perspective. It is at the very least the opportunity to embrace the true autistic perspective, to be able to unleash what autistic people actually think and feel. Now, I'm not gonna lie, it's kind of awkward imagining the autistic culture or the autistic language, because I know, at the very least in the long term, that there will be multiple different autistic cultures, ethnicities, and languages. However, they will all originate from some sort of reverse ideology of autism awareness, because we've already seen the effect that autism awareness has on neurotypical cultures and languages. And they can cope with it better, but it's not even good for them. Not good is actually kind of an insult by virtue of being an understatement. Despite the fact that autism awareness is a worldwide phenomenon, it's only getting faster and bigger. So we need to stop it fast. I'm tempted to say that I'm an accelerationist, but not in the Landian sense, but rather in the sense that I want to accelerate ideological radicalism. So, essentially, do not believe anything that autism awareness says. Secularly speaking, the mind is the most complex thing in the universe, which makes psychology almost impossible to make into a scientific field, because you're always either looking at one small aspect or trying to grasp the entire society and individual mind, which is, yeah, basically impossible. But we can infer that autism awareness is always lying, or we can expect them to lie about anything. Because if autism awareness told the truth, autistic people would find that useful, and especially now that they're trying to market themselves to autistic people, you know that they're lying. If they told the truth, that would help autistic people. Now, first of all, they could do a reverse psychology, and it's more important to be the opposite of autism awareness in terms of what you actually do and how you obtain information and inferences, rather than the observations themselves. But if Autism Speaks were to make an article about how Reimu Hakare wasn't real or autistic, I would go to myself, oh shit, Reimu Hakare is real and autistic, and Autism Speaks is trying to go to Gensokyo to kill Reimu Hakare because she's the only autistic person that can stop Autism Speaks. Now, I say the opposite of what autism awareness tells you, because to be the opposite can mean very different things, or a variety of different things. You could be the opposite of blue by being a highly desaturated yellow or orange or even gray if you think about it. And that's because the point is to oppose autism awareness as a culture rather than an ideology that comes from just one individual. And this is especially good at dodging the whole reverse psychology thing. As anti-centrists are to centrists, autistic people should be to autism awareness. Now, that's sort of a hierarchical thing where some types of oppositeness is better than others. The actual facts are less important than the theory, and the theory is less important than what you advocate for, the wisdom, and the lower wisdom, what autistic people should do, is less important than how you think and how you gather information, epistemology. Essentially, in terms of Wilber's model, the I and we should be emphasized in terms of gaining knowledge, whereas the it should be taken out. The it quadrant is almost useless for autistic people, except if you want to spite autistic people. Or, in layman's terms, focus on anthropology and linguistics, or something like that, because it's the opposite of behaviorism. Behaviorism, the flesh of autism awareness, has been existing ever since the Little Albert experiment, but that's also when it started rotting, so it's inevitable that autism awareness will die, but what about autistic people? Will autistic people survive? That's the real question. And we have until 2030 to get this knocked out because of climate change, first of all, but nowadays autism awareness is rotting, but still powerful enough to put like 20% of autistic people in ABA. I infer that from the labor statistics regarding ABA, how many people in ABA are employed, but it's safe to assume that it's somewhere around 20% of autistic children nowadays, which is probably 10 times more than this generation, the generation I'm in, Gen Z. As a matter of fact, I know that Autism Speaks will fall sometime next year with the help of divine intervention. Now, my actual prophecy is much more specific and comes from a very specific source of faith, but I'm not getting into specifics just yet because it's kind of beside my point. I know that no legitimate faith will accept autism awareness as an ideology. No legitimate faith will accept behaviorism because by its nature, behaviorism is against religion. It cannot accept God, much less humanity. Monotheists, polytheists, and pantheists will all realize the same thing, that autism awareness is antithetical to religion, antithetical to culture, and antithetical to morals. Already, people such as Kathleen Sadel have said that God created autistic people, and some Muslim families accept autistic children as gifts of God. If most people don't hate what you have to say, then you haven't truly said anything.